You're listening to the Happier Marriage Secret podcast, and today you'll discover the secret on how to stop sweeping problems under the rug so that you and your spouse can experience deeper connection and have a more satisfying marriage. Stay tuned.
Hello and welcome to the Happier Marriage Podcast, a podcast for spouses longing to have a happier marriage so they can feel more connected, desired and supported. Now, to start the show, here is your host and Sherpa, licensed marriage and family therapist and certified relationship coach, Kingsley Grant.
Do you feel like in your marriage, so many things that has happened gets swept under the rug? What's that like for you when you feel like your husband or your wife is not wanting to deal with the issue? And so it's almost like you're acting as if something never happened. This never happened. That never happened. How frustrating that can be, right? I know, because I have been guilty of that myself in my own relationship, my own marriage, where I find that in my mind, it's easier to just avoid certain things that needs attention, that should be dealt with, because of what, in my mind, that could lead to if we addressed the issue. It's almost like the elephant in the room. And I find that it never goes away. We tiptoe around it and we just pretend like it's never there. It never happened. Is that something that you have experienced in your marriage as well? Well, that's what we're going to talk about in this episode of the Happier Marriage Secret podcast. How to stop sweeping problems under the rug and what to do instead. Stay tuned.
So, the big question is this. How is it possible that you have a happier marriage when you feel like you've tried everything? Your spouse isn't making an effort. You're exhausted. You feel like giving up. Or there's so much hurt that's taken place between you and your spouse. That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answers.
Okay, so I want you to picture this. You're in your living room and there's a huge mess on the floor, or any room you can choose, but there's a huge mess on the floor. Now, instead of cleaning it up, you grab a rug and sweep everything that's on the floor underneath the rug, right? So it's out of sight, out of mind, right? Wrong. And just like in our marriages, when we sweep our problems under the rug, they don't magically disappear. Instead, what they do is they fester and they grow until they explode into something much bigger. But also, what may be happening is there is resentment and bitterness and anger, and all the other negative emotions are also been festering under there as well, wouldn't you say? Maybe you have experienced that and you know what it is I'm talking about. We know God desires a thriving marriage for us because it's spoken of in the Bible in Ephesians 5, verses 22 to 33. It speaks about the kind of marriages that God wants us to have. But sometimes avoiding conflict can feel like the, quote, Christian, unquote, thing to do. It feels as if we are being more Christian if we're avoiding conflict. And I understand that. I grew up in a Christian home. And one of the things that we were taught was which is biblical, right? Seek peace at all times. Because the Bible says, as much as it is on you, seek to live at peace with every person possibly, right? We should seek that out. So we, in a sense, the inference would be, don't seek out conflict. Avoid conflict at all costs. That was what was kind of embedded in my mind. It wasn't necessarily taught that way, but that's what I understood it to me. If you're going to do one thing, then it means avoiding something else, right? The opposite of that thing. And so avoiding conflict at all costs was the kind of things we did. Basically, in my own home, that was something that was kind of encouraged to stay away from conflict because we need to behave in a manner. And I get this part, and I do agree. We behave in a manner that is Christ-like, which is peaceful. But even Jesus, right? At times he said, one of the things he taught one time, he said, I didn't come to send peace on this earth, but a sword, because you're going to find father against son and mother against daughter. And, this kind of relationship experiences at times when conflict does enter the equation. But here's the truth. Sweeping problems under the rug isn't what God wants. So what should we do then? I think we need to acknowledge the elephant in the room, or face the elephant in the room. That's what I believe we as couples, as Christian couples, mainly, should strive to do to please God, and in the process, nurture intimacy. The Bible sets a powerful example that God has modeled for us the things he's asked us to do. Remember Adam and Eve? God didn't just sweep their disobedience under the rug. I mean, he came and had a difficult conversation with them, reminding them of his love, but also the consequences of their actions, because he had told them what it is that if they should disobey, what would happen, right? He told Adam that. So God dealt with that. He did not shy away from what was conflictual. He had to confront the action of Adam and Eve. He could not just let it go and pretend like it never happened, even though he loved them and he wanted to see them be, not be kind of cast away. He wanted to see them in a right relationship with him. But to have that right relationship, he had to confront an action that violated the relationship he had established with them. And so it is true in your relationship and my relationship. When something violates what it is that we are trying to strive for in our marriage, we've got to confront it. But I know it's easier said than done. I get it. Because as I mentioned before, I'm sometimes a bit conflict avoidant in my own marriage. And I would say my wife happens to be that way as well. So we avoid sometimes some difficult conversation. Now, when it does require to have them, we do have them. We've gotten better, and we've managed them in a way where they doesn't seem as difficult as it once did, because we have kind of understood each other and how each person prefer to hear certain things. We've learned that, hey, we've been married 38 years. Hello. I guess we have learned a thing or two in our marriage, and that should happen also in your relationship. But my point is that God confronted Adam and Eve. But also, remember the other story that comes to my mind is the story of David, King David, when he committed adultery with Bathsheba, right? It was someone else's wife. And so it brought him immense pain in his family, because we know the story. But the point is that God could have just avoided dealing with David, because remember now, David was a man after God's own heart. God said that about David. He's a man after my own heart. So God loved David. He selected David to be king of all his brothers, and David was special. But David was not going to be somehow gotten off the hook because he's David. God, in a relationship with David, confronted him through the prophet Nathan, who told David, hey, listen, man, what you did was wrong. What you did was wrong. But he also offered him a path to redemption. God offered David a path to redemption, like he also did to Adam and Eve. And so the point is that in relationships, we're going to have these moments, but there should also be a path to redemption. It should not just be a confront for confronting's sake. There should be a purpose, an intent. What is it where we want to see happen after that? What is the path to redemption in our relationships that we want to see happen, right? Proverbs 27 verse 5 and 6 says this: better is open rebuke than hidden love. Wounds from a friend are faithful, but an enemy multiplies kisses. See, Solomon points out this whole thing that we should, yes, it's an open rebuke. It's better. It stings. It's hurtful. But it's wounds that are faithful from a friend. It's faithful. It's purposeful. It's with intention to heal. It's better to have that than, as Solomon says, multiples of kisses from an enemy who will try to kiss up and act as if nothing happened. That's not true love and true relationships. True friendship. True love doesn't shy away from difficult conversations. It's about honesty and growth. And that's what I believe is important, that if we're going to then deal with these issues that we sometimes sweep under the rug. Sweeping problems under the rug is like ignoring the elephant in the room. It's still there, even if we pretend it's not. Even if we pretend it's not, right? Now, I know the fear of upsetting your spouse tend to be, like I mentioned, be at what's at play, what's at stake. And I understand that, right? You understand it? I understand that. Sometimes fear can hold us back. Many times that's what's at play. We fear what might happen. And sometimes what we fear most never really happened. I think it was Tom Sawyer, one of the old classical thing. He would say that the thing we fear most never happened. 95% of the time never happened. I think something along that line. You can look that up and see what he said about that. But it was along that line. We might worry about upsetting our spouse, right? I worry about if I bring something to my wife, it would upset her, and vice versa. And it's, you know what? That is part of our care and our love. We want the best from our relationship. I understand that. We worry that they might feel attacked. Why? Because they have said that in the past. I feel like you're attacking me, right? And so now we also fear that we might break the connection that we so cherish. So there's a fear approach that's at play. The Bible says that fear brings torment. Fear is a matter of, it's tormenting to have this thing in your mind. And so it eats away at you. It needs to be addressed, but you don't do that. Why? Again, this fear issue. Like I said, they're legitimate. I understand them because I've been there myself. I've experienced that. And in the work that I do as a licensed marriage and family therapist and a certified relationship coach, I can tell you, I deal with this a lot of times with my clients. I hear these reasons given as to why they would rather act as if something never happened, or why things get swept under the rug so often. I get it. I get it. I'm sure that one of the reasons many times that is at play is that we want to honor God. But here's what happened. As much as we want to honor God, and we should, you also don't want to be a pushover. God does not in any way advocate or say that we should be a pushover, right? Because Jesus, look at his life. Many times I hear the WWJD, what would Jesus do? I like the one that says, watch what Jesus did. Because we learn a lot from him in relationships. He was not a pushover, far from it. If you know the stories of Jesus very well, that was not true. But yet he acted in humility. He showed empathy. He showed compassion. And I think we ought to show those things as well. It's very important that we do. So that is very understandable that we do those things. In not wanting to be a pushover, the challenge now becomes, what do you do, right? What do we do in that? Because we want to also still be pleasing to God. We don't want to do things that we know would be offensive or somehow go run afoul with our relationship with God. And we don't want to be a pushover. So sometimes we find ourselves in this dilemma. We find ourselves in this sticky place because now what should we do? Well, there is something that you and I can do. There's something that I believe that will help in this area. I call that the power of the I statements, right? Using I statements. These are things you may have heard before the importance of using I statements rather than you statements, right? This is what I believe is your secret weapon for having courageous conversations that honor God and your spouse, the I statements. I teach this a lot. I teach my clients, whether it's my counseling or coaching, or sometimes when I'm being asked to do a workshop, right, whether it's virtually or in person, I teach this idea of I statements because I think it gives you an opportunity to talk about the things that are on your heart. It bothers you. It's really the sticky subject matters, right? The elephant in the room. How do you approach that without feeling as if you're going to, you're going to cause a problem. You're going to make matters worse. You're going to create conflict. You're going to feel like you're this nagging person or whatever the case might be. How do you do that? I statements is really what you use. And of course, we won't use this episode to go all into that because there's some very strategic way to approach I statements. There are some things that are so important when people say, well, just use the I statements. It's not as simple as using the I statements because there are some things that you must have sequentially that must happen in sharing your I statement that the person can hear you, right? So as a quick example, instead of saying something that causes one to feel as if you're accusing them, right? For example, you may say, you never listened to me. You never listened to me, right? So immediately what's going to happen is your partner, or if you've ever been at the receiving end of that, you're going to become defensive, right? Because again, you're being told about something that they're saying that you never. And so that's a key word that the brain hears and it goes into defensive mode because why? It's simply saying that's not true. It cannot be true if I can find one time when I do listen to you. But when the person says, you never listened to me, or you hear that, you and I are going to go into defensive mode and we want to counter and try to put the record straight by saying, that's not true. And here we go off to the races in a whole nother discussion and fights and down the rabbit trail that never was intended in the first place. So instead of saying you never listened to me, for example, you could try something like, I feel unheard when I bring up this concern, or I feel unheard when I bring this matter to you and then it's dismissed or it's as if I never said anything. There's no acknowledgement. There's nothing that let me know that you actually heard me. So I feel unheard. Basically, in the context of that, the tone that's really being communicated is, I feel sad. It saddens me in our relationship when something like this happens. Now, like I said, there's multiple layers that, you could go into. And so when I say the tone is, I feel sad, is really what's behind it, because there are those core emotions that are at play. And this is one of those emotions, the sad emotions that is playing out here as well. I statements, it focuses on your feelings, right? How you're feeling about the matter, what's happening within inside of you without placing blame. Remember, in Ephesians 4, verse 29, Paul says, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. So I statements, it helps to help build bridges, not walls. I statements is what allows you to communicate some deep things that you may have wanted to do, right? But you couldn't find a way to do that. This helps you to do that. Now, we mentioned about feeling unheard. This is also one of the things that you experience in your relationship, feeling unseen or misunderstood, right? How often have you felt like you are misunderstood? Or have you said to or heard that you're misunderstanding what I'm trying to say? Or maybe you felt unseen, right? This is another common struggle that we experience in our relationship, in our marriages, feeling unseen or misunderstood. You pour your heart out and only to have your spouse seems distant or dismissive or just aloof. Nothing really mattered. Nothing moved him or her. And you just poured your heart out. Nothing is as hurtful, or let's put it that way. That's one of the most hurtful things anyone can experience in a relationship. So what happened is then, if you are in that situation, you want to model what you want for yourself. I go back to the words of Jesus. Do unto others as you would have them to do unto you. How do you listen? How do you actively listen to your husband, your wife in your relationship? So active listening is what as one of those skills which is so essential to effective communication. So what you're doing here is you're giving your spouse your full focus. This is not where you're on your phone dabbling and say things like, "Oh, I hear you. No, I'm listening." Or you're watching television, or you're distracted by some other things, and just to say to your spouse, "No, I'm listening to you. I'm hearing you. I'm hearing everything you're saying." No. You're not in that active listening mode. You're missing something because your brain cannot do two things at the same time. It feels that way, but it truly is not. It's kind of flittering through two things at the same time, back and forth. But because it happens so fast, you think you're doing two things at the same time. And most times you miss out on what it is that you need to hear. I remember working with a client who said to me, "It seems like I have I have a memory problem," they say. "I have a memory problem." I said, "Why? Why do you feel like you have a memory problem?" The person will say that many times after a conversation, I don't remember what it was that we talked about. Or if this person said, if my spouse brings up XYZ to me, I said, "I don't remember." And they will say, "What do you mean you don't remember? We had a conversation and you gave me the impression that you heard me because you told me that you were listening." And this person said, I just have a hard time. I said, "Okay, so when you're in those moments with your spouse, what is it you're doing?" The person will say, "Oh, I might be on my phone, or I might be, watching something, or whatever case it might be, or there's a multiple amount of things on my mind about what's coming up next, what I'm going to be doing today." I said, "Because you're not present. You're not present, hence you're not going to be able to remember what it is that was said." So you're not having active listening, because active listening requires full focus, eye contact. It requires you to be paraphrasing and feedback what it is you're hearing, because that's what it's called, active listening, right? You're paraphrasing to the best of your ability what it is that you heard, so to really check in to make sure you're fully understanding what was said. You're asking clarifying questions if needed. I say there's two things that happens in active listening is curious questioning and observation statements that are being made. And that's a whole different conversation for another time, but those are two things that are so essential. James in the Bible, chapter 1, verse 19 says, so often I use this verse a lot, because it's really is one of the greatest, I believe, verses on communication that is anywhere it can be found, where James says, "Be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger." Quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. And it just continues to say, "For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God." So basically what James is saying, we hear things or see things quickly. Our brain captures that really quickly, right? Through our ear gates or eye gates, we capture some things. But he says, as quickly as you receive, as those things enter your sphere, right? Be slow to speak, slow to respond. And he continues by saying, slow to anger. Slow to anger. You're slowing things down. And there's some things you can do when I teach on this. I would say, for example, you can be present with your breathing. That's one thing to slow things down. It's another thing also to give feedback in your brain. You could be tracking in your brain what the other person is saying, so you're not ahead of them and trying to figure out how do you answer this. You're present with them to capture what's being said. That is how the memory will work, and you'll remember things I said to this person. So when you're doing this, you're actively creating a safe space, which I've spoken about in past episodes, a safe space for open communication, which also strengthens that very critical need of yours and your spouse, and that is to have deeper connection, right? Deeper connection and have more intimacy. These are what I believe is so helpful. So this idea then, as we begin by talking about how to stop sweeping problems under the rug, these are some things I believe will help you to avoid that and to be better at the relationship. Remember, having difficult conversations doesn't mean constant fighting. That many times is what our brain shy away from, because we're thinking, oh, this is going to end in a fight. It's going to end as it always does. And maybe you might need an outside party to help reestablish, what I call ground rules, right? Or rules of engagement or rules of the game, so that you can know what rules are you playing by that you both can come up with. That helps you to make sure that you stay within the boundaries of the conversation. So it doesn't have to always, in your mind, like you said, or your thinking, end up in fighting. It doesn't have to, right? It's about honoring God through honest communication that strengthens your bond and brings you closer to each other, which is what you ultimately want. You also can use this as an opportunity to pray together and pray for the conversation, pray for guidance and wisdom, right? And of course, as I mentioned before, seek support from your church community, other community that you may be a part of, a Christian counselor. And I mentioned Christian because if you're a Christian, you want to be able to have someone who has the Bible or Christianity as a frame of reference, who will use that and factor that into how they're counseling with you, right? Doesn't mean other counselors cannot be helpful. They can. But again, as I say, they're not going to have this frame of reference for which you want to be a part of this counseling session that you're having with them. So by following God's example, my friend, and practicing healthy communication, you can tackle any challenge which leads to deepening your love, your commitment to each other, your connection, your intimacy, your respect for one another, which is what you really want at the end of the day. Would you agree with that? I think you would. So I want to say to you, these are some things I mentioned before that, again, the elephant in the room. We want to make sure that we face the elephant, acknowledge the elephant in the room. We also want to be aware of our fears, that are at play, and how we overcome our fears, as I mentioned before. Did I mention the power of the I statements? Using the I statements to be able to communicate the difficult things to your spouse, and also discussing about active listening as one way that you don't go away feeling misunderstood or unheard, and neither does your partner as well. I believe when you do these things, you'll see the difference in your relationship. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this and see which of these resonated with you. Make sure that you are following me, if you have not yet done so, on Instagram, where you can send me a direct message. I'd love to hear from you there. But also you can, through Spotify and or Apple Podcast, you can leave a rating and a review there as well, so that I can see your thoughts about this episode here on the Happier Marriage Secrets podcast. It will be very, very helpful. Those things are helps a great deal. Matters a great deal to me. So I hope you do that as well. Now, as you continue then to work on that, let me just mention to you that I have prepared for you basically a free gift. Okay, a free gift. So having come to the end of our episode here, right, another fantastic episode, which I hope you would agree that I want to mention this free gift that you are able to get simply by requesting it, right? So how you request that? Now the free gift is is a 28-day conversation starter prompt. So it's 28 days of one a day conversation starter. It's different conversation every single day, and it outlines how to have those conversations, because it allows you to be in the habit of talking things through with your spouse on a daily basis that are non-threatening, non-nuclear. They won't erupt into much. So I want to encourage you to get that. If you go to happiermarriagesecrets.com, happiermarriagesecrets.com/start, right? START. So happiermarriagesecrets.com/start. You can request your free copy, okay, of this of 28-day of conversation with your spouse. So as we've come to the end of another exciting episode, I'm glad you were here. If you like what you've heard and want to go deeper on this. Again, but also I have a workshop that I'm going to be doing on a regular basis called Couples Talk It Out. And in this workshop, you will learn how to master difficult conversations and build deeper connections. And if this interests you, simply follow me on Instagram and comment on one of my posts, the word easy, right? Easy. And you'll be able to enter your information so we can reserve your spot. So do so today. Looking forward to going deeper with you on creating space for these difficult conversations in that workshop. So my friend, God bless you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining me. And may the Lord bless you and keep you and make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May you know his peace and his joy in your relationship each and every day. God bless you, my friend, and see you on the next episode. God bless.